You found the truth, but it came like a knife, not a relief. You thought finding her would bring peace, that everything would make sense. But instead, she tore you apart. She didn't whisper comfort. She screamed. I undressed you, made you bleed in silence. Rumi wrote, the truth was a mirror that fell from the sky and shattered. Each person took a piece and thought they had the whole. But what if you had taken the sharpest piece? You've spent your whole life looking for answers, searching for meaning in abandonment, an explanation for the emptiness, a cure for the pain of loving someone who never truly saw you. You followed signs, listened to advice, prayed prayers that no one heard. And then, the truth has come out. Raw, cold, impossible to ignore. It wasn't a soft light at the end of the tunnel. It was a fire, a revelation that burned everything you believed about yourself, about others, about love, about God. Why does it hurt so much? You feel like you're falling from a place you didn't even know you were hanging from. The illusion was a house. The truth, an earthquake. Maybe you discovered that the love you gave was begged for, that the person you idolized saw you as something disposable. Or maybe finally, you realized that you were the one betraying yourself every day, smiling to keep the peace, keeping quiet to be loved, abandoning oneself so as not to be abandoned. And now the question pulses in your soul. If the truth sets you free, why does it seem to destroy me? The problem is that no one told you that the truth doesn't come as comfort. It comes as a rupture. It breaks. It reveals what you didn't want to see, and most importantly, who you always were and were trying to hide. Do you feel it? That sharp pain in my chest. This mixture of anger, sadness, despair, and clarity. It's the exact moment when the truth hits you. And the cruelest? She doesn't back down. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you know, you can't pretend to be ignorant. After waking up, the dream no longer fits inside you. Truth is often the voice of the soul whispering, stop pretending. Stop pretending everything is okay. Stop pretending that this relationship heals you. Stop pretending you're strong when you're falling apart. But accepting this takes courage, because it hurts. It hurts like the mourning of a life that was never real. It hurts like the death of a hope that kept you alive for too long. It hurts like looking in the mirror for the first time and seeing the wound you've always covered with emotional makeup. Rumi said, the wound is the place where the light enters you. But are you ready to let the light in? Because light reveals. It illuminates even what you didn't want to see. It shows that your pain isn't the problem. Your denial is. She reveals that you always knew, but didn't want to know. You found the truth, and it didn't come wrapped in pretty phrases. She came like a broken mirror, like a deep cut, like a screaming silence. And now, you are here, hearing that voice, not by chance, but because your soul asked for it. You don't want any more sweet lies. Want the bitter truth that heals. You want the truth that hurts, but sets you free. But are you ready to see what's really behind this pain? Are you willing to walk through this truth and without trying to run away once again? Because that's when everything starts to change. But before you continue, take a breath. Feel what this truth is awakening within you. If any part of you is crying silently right now, write in the comments, I felt it. No need to explain. Just leave this sign. Maybe your soul just needs to know that it is not alone on this journey. And if this message touched something that no one else has ever been able to touch in you, leave your like, not by me, but for you. Because every time you enjoy something that awakens you, you say to your soul, I'm listening. And if this channel echoes your deepest truths, subscribe. There's more, much more. And this journey is still in its beginning. Now, let's go deeper. Because what hurts is not just the truth. That's what she makes clear. It reveals an old pain, a silent wound you've carried for years. The pain of having been invisible, of having loved alone, having grown up believing that I needed to deserve attention. The pain of having to be too strong too soon, of being everyone's support, but never having anywhere to lean on. The truth reveals how much you have molded yourself to fit in the eyes of others, how much you held back your tears so as not to bother anyone, how much you hid, thinking this was love. And now you realize the pain that the truth causes is not new. She's always been here. You just didn't have the courage to look at her. Until now, you searched for answers. And when you finally found them, you only felt more pain. This wasn't what you expected. You thought discovering the truth would bring relief, peace, direction, but it only brought silence. A heavy, deep silence that echoed inside your chest like a vacuum. You stood there staring at something that had always been there, but now seemed too unbearable to pretend you didn't see it anymore. The truth has this cruel power to illuminate precisely where you were hiding. And when it shines that light, what emerges isn't pretty. It's not poetic. It's not that movie scene where everything fits together. What emerges is a devastated emotional landscape, full of pieces of yourself that you've been burying over time, believing it would be easier to live this way. Fragmented, but functional. But now, even functional, you feel a growing emptiness. Because living in pieces was never truly living. That's why the truth hurts so much. Because it takes away your emotional crutches. It rips away the cloths you've thrown over your traumas. It says, with a relentless whisper, look, and you look, you see, and then you realize, it's not the truth that hurts you. It's everything you've built on the lie that's now crumbling. You realize you weren't loved as you thought. That friendship was dependency. That relationship was attachment, not spiritual connection. That the image you created of yourself, strong, self-sufficient, wise, was just armor. And the soul, behind it all, was begging for help. The invisible pain of truth lies not in the truth itself, but in the revelation of how disconnected you've been from your essence. How far you've distanced yourself from your soul, trying to please, to be accepted, to be enough. And now, with everything exposed, there's no going back to the emotional ignorance that numbed you. Awareness has arrived. Spiritual awakening has begun. And it's neither gentle nor sweet. It's harsh, uncomfortable, almost brutal. You feel the ground disappear. Because the structure your identity was resting on was fragile, based on external validation, on familiar repetitions, on promises that were never truly yours. The truth pushes you to a place where you no longer have anywhere to hide, and it's in this place that you begin to rebuild yourself. But first, you break, and breaking hurts, because it's not just a matter of emotion. It's your spiritual ego being confronted. That part of you that believed you were already healed, already awakened, already understood everything. And suddenly life shows you that you're still stuck in a cycle, that you're still living to be chosen, that you still await approval, that you still trade your soul for a little attention. It frustrates you, and at the same time, it frees you, because even though it's painful, something inside you knows it's real now, that there's no going back, that you can no longer ignore this inner call that's been screaming for years. Rumi said, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. And maybe you're exactly at that moment. Your heart can no longer bear to close itself off. It can no longer maintain control. And so it begins to give in, to open, to let the pain in, not as an enemy, but as part of the process of returning to your purest truth. That's why many people disappear at this stage. They disappear from the world. They disappear from themselves. Not because they're giving up, but because they can no longer sustain a life that's not aligned with their soul. And that's part of the process. What no one tells you about spiritual awakening is that it involves first, mourning. The mourning of who you thought you were. The mourning of the stories you were told. The mourning of the role you played for so long to feel accepted. You look around and no longer recognize yourself. What once nourished you no longer does. Those bonds no longer comfort. Those dreams no longer make sense. And then the pain sets in like a sacred warning. Something must die so that something true can be born. It's not easy to hear, because you still love things that hurt you. You still long for the presence of those who diminish you. You still hold out hope for idealized versions of love, connection, and belonging. But the truth doesn't negotiate. It reveals itself. And after that, it's up to you to decide whether to keep pretending or to embrace the process of awakening. Even if it begins with tears, this invisible pain you feel, it's not destroying you, it's cleansing you, it's clearing away what's false, it's removing what's no longer compatible with your new spiritual vibration, it's dissolving structures that only worked when you were emotionally asleep. But now, you're awake, and that changes everything. You no longer want relationships that consume you. You don't want any more shallow conversations. You don't want to sell yourself for love anymore. You want depth. You want spiritual reciprocity. You want peace. You want true silence, not the silence of someone pretending everything is okay. That's why the pain of truth is so disconcerting. It doesn't just come with tears. It comes with decisions. And you feel like you're on the threshold between the old world and a new one that you don't even know what it's like yet. But something inside you tells you, keep going. Don't run away now. You've come too far to go back. As you listen to this, something might be stirring inside you, not rationally, but on a deep level, where words can't reach, where only the soul can understand. And if you've made it this far and are still listening, reading, feeling, write in the comments. Now it makes sense. This simple phrase is a code, an acknowledgement, a symbol that you are present in the process, that the truth is being embraced, that no matter how much it hurts, you will no longer run away. Before the truth, there was a comfortable lie, a story you repeated to yourself every day, a carefully constructed narrative to justify the pain, to soften the abandonment, to transform what was rejection into something acceptable. This lie seemed to protect you. It was like a thin blanket on a cold night. It didn't really warm you, but it helped you endure. And deep down, even though you knew it was fragile, you clung to it like a last thread of sanity. You said it was just a phase, that things would change, that the other person just needed time, that you needed more patience, that love was just like that, painful, confusing, a little twisted. You said you were strong, that you could handle it, that it was all unconditional love. And so you convinced yourself that loving someone who hurt you was a sign of spiritual maturity. But the truth is, it was just neediness, masquerading as surrender. You thought the problem lay with the other person, that the absence was theirs, that the coldness came from outside, that the disinterest was someone else's fault. But then the truth appeared, raw, relentless, and it didn't point outward. It turned the mirror inward, and you saw that the relationship only continued because you allowed it, that the pain only remained because you refused to let it go, that person only manipulated you because you clung to the idea of being loved by someone incapable of truly seeing you. And it hurts, because seeing the wound is very different from feeling the pain. You've felt the pain for years, but seeing the wound is being confronted with your part in all this. It's realizing that you also lied, that you also abandoned yourself, that you also constructed a story to justify the absence of love. And when the wound appears, you can no longer be blind. You can no longer blame fate, childhood, or others. The truth lays bare your emotional responsibility. And that, more than anything, shatters the ego. You discover that somewhere along your path, you stopped listening to yourself. You stopped protecting yourself. You stopped choosing yourself. And you threw yourself into a desperate attempt to be accepted, to be seen, to be important to someone. You believed that if you loved enough, that would be enough. But the truth has shown that love doesn't compensate for disrespect, that surrender doesn't justify silence, that emotional intensity isn't spiritual reciprocity. The illusion was sweet. It was comforting. It said, "You're doing everything right. You just have to wait." But the truth doesn't have that tone of voice. The truth whispers, "You're betraying yourself." And that phrase, when it sinks in, changes everything. You start to remember all the times you felt discomfort but ignored, all the signs your intuition screamed at you, but you chose to silence, all the nights you cried quietly so as not to disturb, all the times you hid in the name of a love that, in reality, only diminished you. The truth doesn't come to blame you, it comes to free you. But before it frees you, it destroys. It needs to shatter the image you have of yourself, the image of the person who endures everything, who loves despite everything, who is always willing to wait, because this image is the shield of the wounded ego, and the soul doesn't evolve where the ego commands. Therefore, the truth tears. It tears. It exposes. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. You realize you spent years trying to be enough for someone, that you molded your essence to fit into spaces too tight for your soul, that you negotiated boundaries, gave up your peace, silenced your truth, all in the name of fear of loss. But now you understand, what you were afraid of losing was never yours, and what is truly yours doesn't diminish you. And at that point, you find yourself in limbo, between the old illusion and the new truth, an uncomfortable space where everything seems uncertain. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but you know you can't go back to yesterday. The illusion that protected you now suffocates you. That version of you that smiled while crying inside can no longer stand. The mask is slipping, and with it, the idea that love is sacrifice. You begin to understand that true spirituality isn't about enduring pain, but about freeing yourself from it. That it's not about resisting, it's about allowing yourself to break free from what hurts you. That the soul demands truth, even if it hurts, because the pain that comes from truth heals, and the pain that comes from lies makes you sick. Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings. Why do you prefer to crawl through life? Perhaps because crawling is safer, but now that you've seen, that you've felt, that you've awakened, there's no going back to crawling. Something in you already knows that the fall of illusion is the beginning of flight. With each new breath, you feel the deconstruction taking place. It's as if something is breaking from the inside out. It can't be explained rationally. It's visceral, it's spiritual, it's emotional. You're changing, and even with fear, even with pain, something inside you tells you you're on the right path, that you're finally finding yourself. And as strange as it may seem, this pain has a different flavor. It's not a pain that consumes you. It's a pain that reveals you. If all of this has touched you in any way, if this part of the truth has resonated within you, write in the comments, "Now I see." This phrase is a sign that you've accepted what was always there, that the illusion has fallen, that healing has begun. The wound is where the light enters you. That's what Rumi said. But no one told you that before this light warms, it burns. Burning is part of the process. Illumination requires crossing the darkness. And when the light of truth enters, it doesn't choose the easiest path. It enters exactly where it hurts, where you spent years hiding, where you'd rather no one touch, where you yourself avoided looking. You may have sought this truth with faith, with courage, with a sincere desire to awaken, but when it finally arrives, it doesn't look like what you imagined. It doesn't come gently, nor romantically. It comes with rupture. It doesn't destroy what is essential. It destroys what is illusory. And almost everything you believed about yourself, about others, about love, about life, was an illusion. It was a projection of the wounded ego. It was a defense built on fear, abandonment, rejection, and shame. Spiritual awakening, contrary to what many say, doesn't begin with light. It begins with loss. Loss of identity, loss of references, loss of bonds that no longer vibrate at the same frequency. You feel as if you're being ripped from the ground you've always walked on, as if the rug of reality has been pulled from under your feet. But what's crumbling isn't you. It's the emotional and spiritual structure that no longer supports who you're becoming. And here comes the point that few have the courage to admit. You no longer want to go back to who you were, but you're still afraid of being who you're being born to be. Because the new is still unknown. It's still silent. It still has no defined forms. It still holds no promises. The soul knows it's awakening. But the ego screams. It wants to return. It wants control. It wants security. It can't stand the void between illusion and truth. This space between the old and the new is what Rumi would call a crossing. A space where light begins to enter, but still hurts. A space where the soul moves slowly, as if walking barefoot on hot coals. Where everything you believed begins to dissolve, and everything that truly matters still has no name. It is in this space that the spiritual rupture occurs, and there is no avoiding it, nor can it be hastened. You begin to realize how much you lived based on what was expected of you, how much you molded yourself, diminished yourself, disguised yourself, all to be accepted, validated, loved. But the truth, when it enters, deprograms. It deconstructs these characters you created. And perhaps the hardest thing of all is not losing the other person, but losing the idea you had of yourself. That version that seemed strong, but was only surviving. That image of balance which was just emotional control in disguise. That spirituality that seemed profound, but avoided pain with pretty phrases. Spiritual truth is not aesthetically pleasing. It doesn't immediately transform you into a being of light. It first invites you to die to the ego, to control, to the need for recognition, to die to the image you've created for yourself in the mirror of other people's approval. And this death is slow, painful, and sacred. You start to remember all the times you felt something was wrong but chose to stay. All the relationships you sustained out of fear of being alone. All the situations where you chose to remain silent to maintain a semblance of peace. But the soul doesn't want false peace. It wants truth. And when that truth arrives, it rips away everything that no longer matches its essence. You realize that the pain you feel now is different from the pain you felt before. Before, the pain was suffocating, recurring, paralyzing. Now it's a pain that cleanses, that opens space, that reveals. It's no longer a pain of abandonment. It's a pain of return, because you're returning to yourself. And this return requires traversing the rubble of what you believed yourself to be. It requires leaving behind the versions of yourself you used to survive. And this, as liberating as it may be, hurts. A spiritual rupture is a break with what has numbed you. It's the end of numbness. It's the moment when you feel everything you've avoided feeling for years. Because now there's no distraction that works. Now there's no longer a relationship that hides the emptiness. Now there's no longer an excuse to sustain the escape. You stand naked before yourself. And even though you're afraid, something inside you chooses to stay, chooses to cross over. This is where many give up, because they don't understand that this process is part of the healing. That confusion is part of the realignment. That chaos is the womb of the new being that is being born within you. The soul knows this. It recognizes this path. But the ego tries to resist. It tries to negotiate. It tries to return to the familiar. It tries to recreate old stories to avoid the pain of starting over. But it's over. You've seen it. You've felt it. You've understood it. Even if you can't explain it in words, your body knows it. Your breathing has changed. Your silence is fuller. Your presence is more intense. You're not the same anymore, and you won't be able to live the same way again. Because when the truth enters, it occupies, it changes, it transforms. What you're experiencing now isn't the end. It's the necessary rupture for the light to enter. It's the collapse that precedes rebirth. It's the dark night of the soul that precedes true awakening. Rumi said, "Don't look outside for what can only be healed within." And perhaps now is when that phrase resonates. You won't find this healing outside of yourself. Not in another person, not in promises, not in ready-made answers. It's there, in the midst of your pain, in the center of your soul, at the very point where the rupture occurred. If you are feeling this right now, if this pain has a name, if this spiritual rupture is happening to you right now, write in the comments. The light came in. This phrase will be your seal, your record, your truth written in the world. You try to deny, run, rationalize. You try to give a nicer name to what hurts, a more acceptable explanation for what wounds you. You try to transform abandonment into distraction, rejection into lack of time, absence into freedom. But the soul knows, and the soul is not fooled by words. It feels what is true. It recognizes when it is being betrayed, and every time you try to silence that truth with excuses, it screams even louder. The truth doesn't disappear just because you avoid it. It doesn't disappear just because you're busy. It doesn't weaken just because you've invented another story to tell. It's still there, pulsing inside, like a drum that never stops beating. Even amidst the noise of the world, you can hide behind work, a new relationship, promises, cliches. You can run. You can numb yourself with distractions. You can even pretend to yourself that you no longer feel anything. But it won't work, because the pain of the truth doesn't go away until it's been pierced through. And crossing hurts. It hurts because it demands presence. It hurts because it demands that you stop running, that you sit down, face yourself, listen to yourself, that you look into the eyes of your wound and say, "I see you. I acknowledge that you exist." And perhaps this is the greatest spiritual challenge of all, not running away from yourself, staying, breathing into the pain, breathing into the discomfort, breathing into what you've tried to erase for so long. Running from the truth has become an addiction disguised as practicality, independence, even spirituality. You say you're fine, you say you've learned, you say you've forgiven, but deep down, there's still a pent-up anger, an unexpressed sadness, a longing you haven't had the courage to fully experience. And all of this becomes noise inside you, a noise that prevents you from hearing what truly matters, your own soul. You're suffering, but not because of the truth. You're suffering because you resist it, because you insist on keeping alive a character who can no longer bear to exist, because you try to control a process that is, by nature, wild, spiritual, unpredictable. You're struggling against the current, fighting a river that only wants to carry you home. but you insist on swimming against it, out of fear, out of attachment, because you don't know who you are without the pain you've always carried. And that's understandable, because for a long time your pain was your identity. It was your argument. It was the place where you hid. You said, I am this way because I was hurt. I am this way because I was left. I am this way because no one chose me. But now the truth is calling you to come out of that place, to stop being the consequence of others' pain and become the answer to your own healing. But to do that, you need to break this habit of running away. You need to break the unconscious repetition that always takes you to the same places, the same patterns, the same relationships, the same endings. You need to break with the story you tell yourself every night to justify not having freed yourself yet. The truth is, on some level, you've become accustomed to the pain. And as much as you say you want to heal, you're still afraid of what you'll find afterward, because you've never lived outside of it. This fear is natural, but it can no longer control you. Because as long as you run away, you'll continue to attract situations that force you to stop. The soul is patient, but it won't accept being ignored forever. It will create whatever ruptures are necessary to wake you up. It will allow everything you hold on to crumble just so you understand that the way forward isn't to hold on, it's to let go. Rumi said, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And living through you is only possible when you stop rushing. When you finally surrender to what you feel, without trying to manipulate its meaning. When you accept that you don't have control over everything, and that you may not have the answers right now, but you do have something much more precious. Awareness. Awareness is the beginning of freedom. Awareness is what transforms pain into wisdom, but it only takes hold when you're willing to stop running away. And that doesn't mean diving into the pain without judgment. It means embracing what's present truthfully. It means telling yourself, I'm no longer going to run away from what I feel. And in that moment, something begins to shift. You realize that the fear you felt of facing the truth was greater than the truth itself, that the suffering of resisting was more intense than the pain of feeling, that the emptiness that accompanied you was created by the space the truth should have occupied. And now, with this clarity, you understand that you must cross over, not out of heroism, not to prove anything, but because there is no other way. You are being called to leave the cycle of pain and enter the cycle of healing. And this transition doesn't happen on the surface. It happens deep within. It happens in silence. It happens when you allow yourself to fall, falling not as a failure, but as a return, falling back into yourself, falling into the lap of your soul. And there, deep within, find what you've always sought outside: truth, love, presence, peace. Escape ends where courage begins. Escape ends when you stop negotiating with pain and start listening to what it wants to teach you. Escape ends when you understand that the only way to stop suffering is to stop running. And when you stop, the soul begins to speak. If this moment has come for you now, if something inside you recognizes that escape is no longer an option, write in the comments, I don't run away anymore. This phrase may seem simple, but it's a vow, a silent pact between you and your own soul. What no one told you is that this pain is a birth. And every birth before being light is a contraction. It's a rupture. It's crossing a boundary between worlds. It's knowing there's no turning back, even if it still hurts to continue. The pain you're feeling now is not a sign of weakness, failure, or spiritual punishment. It's the harbinger of a rebirth. The truth didn't come to punish you. It came to give birth to you. It's pushing you out of a place where you no longer fit, out of the old narratives you've told yourself, out of the roles you played to be accepted, out of the illusion that gave you an identity, but never gave you peace. The truth hurts, because it's birthing you to a new level of consciousness. You're being pulled toward the light, not that superficial light that only illuminates the external, but the raw, intimate, inner light that reveals everything you've always been but couldn't yet access. This light comes from within, and it doesn't enter without tearing. It doesn't enter without disturbing what was dormant. It doesn't enter without deconstructing what you swore was real. It comes from a place that can't be explained in words. It can only be felt. And when it arrives, there's no way to pretend you didn't hear it. This spiritual birth requires a symbolic death. You are dying to be born awake, dying to the versions of yourself that were created out of fear, dying to desires that were, in fact, lack in disguise. dying to the image you constructed to survive in a world that never understood your soul. And this kind of death is the hardest of all, because no one prepares you for it. It happens silently, in the dead of night when no one sees. It happens while you continue to live on the outside, but inside you already feel something being undone. You try to hold on. You try to keep up appearances. You try to remain functional, but something inside you has already begun to unravel. The places that once welcomed you no longer make sense. The conversations that once fulfilled you now seem empty. The goals that once motivated you now feel distant, soulless. And this can leave you confused, because from the outside everything seems the same, but inside, you feel like the world is turning upside down, and it is. Not because something went wrong, but because something finally started to go right. You're breaking out of autopilot. You're beginning to question what you once accepted without thinking. You're realizing that it's no longer possible to live numb. And with that comes discomfort. Because the more awareness you have, the more responsibility you carry. You can no longer blame others, the past, or fate. Now it's you and you. It's you and your soul. It's you and the truth that's trying to be born. This spiritual birth doesn't happen all at once. It comes in waves, in layers, in deep silences followed by unexpected tears. Sometimes, all you can do is breathe. Other times it feels like you're bursting from within. And yet, something inside you knows, this is the way. This pain is cleansing. It's emptying. It's detoxifying your soul of what it never was. It's undoing the knots that prevented you from feeling. It's making room for a version of you that no longer needs to hide behind emotional masks. Truth, however painful, comes with a hidden gift, clarity. And clarity is the seed of healing. When you see clearly, you can no longer repeat old patterns. You can no longer settle for crumbs. You can no longer ignore the call of your soul. The pain of truth is the warning that change has begun, that something new is being gestated within you, that your spirituality is ceasing to be rhetoric and becoming a real experience. You realize you've always sought externally what was already within. You've tried to heal yourself with the eyes of others, with their validation, with their love. But now, the only healing possible is that which comes from within your own emotional womb. It's no longer about who hurt you. It's about what you do with that wound. It's no longer about what was not done for you. It's about what you begin to do for yourself from now on. And this change hurts, because it shakes everything up. You'll lose people. You'll drift away from bonds that once seemed essential. You'll rethink your choices, your beliefs, your path, but you'll gain something infinitely greater: presence. You'll gain a sense of self so profound that no one will be able to take it away from you. You'll gain peace. Not the illusory peace that comes from denial, but true peace, born from the most radical acceptance of who you are. This process may seem lonely, but it isn't. Many souls are awakening at the same time. Many people are experiencing the same kind of rupture, the same kind of pain, the same kind of rebirth. And even though no one around you understands what you're going through, know this: you are not alone. You are in transition. You are crossing the portal between unconsciousness and lucidity, between repetitive suffering and spiritual freedom, between the illusion of the ego and the truth of the soul. And like every birth, this one also requires time, silence, and courage. Courage to stay, even when everything seems to want to push you back to the past. Courage to embrace yourself, even when the old voices inside scream that you're wrong. Courage to choose your soul, even if it costs you what you once called love. The pain you feel now is the portal. It's the threshold, it's the final contraction before release. Don't try to understand with your mind what only your soul can decode. Don't try to run. Don't try to rush. Just feel. Just breathe. Just stay. Because when this labor is over, you'll realize someone new has been born. Someone more whole. Someone more present. Someone who no longer needs to pretend. If you are at this exact point in the journey, if you recognize this pain not as punishment but as transition, write in the comments, "I am being born." This phrase isn't just a symbol, it's a declaration, a reminder that even in pain, there is life. Even in chaos, there is meaning. Even in the end, there is already a beginning. Perhaps you discovered that the love was never reciprocated, that everything you gave, everything you offered of yourself, all the times you silenced your truth to keep the connection alive, weren't seen the way you believed. Perhaps you gave your soul, while the other only touched the surface. And no matter how much you tried to rationalize, justify, hold on, deep down something always told you there was an imbalance, but you preferred to believe in the illusion, because it was comfortable, because it gave you hope to carry on, because accepting the truth meant losing, and you didn't want to lose. You wanted to be chosen. Or perhaps the discovery was even more silent and treacherous. Perhaps you looked at someone you considered a brother, a friend, a refugee, and realized that the support they claimed to offer was fraught with comparison, disguised envy, and veiled competition. Perhaps that friend who stood by your side in difficult times fed off your pain, because if you healed, you might no longer be useful to the emptiness they also carried. And upon realizing this, everything fell apart, not because this person was cruel, but because you, once again, chose to blind yourself to something that was no longer true. The truth didn't shatter your life. It shattered the lie you were living. And that's what hurts. It hurts to realize that what you felt as love was actually attachment, that what you called care was control, that what you thought was connection was a desperate need for acceptance. The truth comes like a bolt of lightning, a sudden cut that reveals the situation as it truly is. No filters, no justifications, no romanticizations, and suddenly, everything changes. Because the pain now has a name, and with the name comes awareness. Before, it was a diffuse ache, a constant discomfort, an inexplicable fatigue, a sadness that had no reason. But now, after the truth, the pain is clear. It has a form. It has a cause. And even though it hurts more intensely, it also carries the possibility of healing, because you can't heal what you still insist on denying. Before the truth, you lived in a safe illusion. Safe because you could still believe, you could still fantasize, you could still hold on to the hope that everything would change, that the other person would see your worth, that all it took was a little more patience, one more chance, one more gesture. Illusion is an anesthetic. It doesn't cure, but it makes it seem bearable. It creates an emotional pause where you can rest from reality, but this rest exacts a price, and the price is yourself. After the truth comes conscious pain, the kind that throbs because now you see, and what's seen can no longer be ignored. You realize that what sustained that relationship wasn't mutual love, it was one-sided effort. That what kept that friendship going wasn't true affection, it was your insistence on not being alone. That what kept you persisting on certain paths wasn't faith, it was fear of starting over. And this conscious pain is brutal, yes, because it tears down structures, it undoes stories, it tears up emotional contracts you've written with people who no longer have a place in your new cycle. But it's also liberating, because as much as it destroys, it opens space. And it's in this space that true transformation begins to manifest. You begin to see the subtleties. You begin to remember moments that once seemed small, but now scream like signs you ignored. Unspoken words, empty looks, promises repeated too often, absences at crucial moments. And you realize it wasn't your madness, that you did feel it, that your soul always knew. But you chose to remain silent. You chose to persist. You chose to believe you could change history with more love, more dedication, more effort. But now you know. True love doesn't need to be forcibly sustained. True friendship doesn't feed on your pain. Real presence doesn't require constant sacrifice. And as obvious as this may seem now, it took a lot of pain to reach this clarity. Because awareness isn't born from comfort. It's born from rupture, from collapse, from the exact moment when everything falls apart and you find yourself without ground. And yet, even without ground, something inside you begins to breathe easier, because you're finally no longer betraying yourself. You're no longer pretending not to feel. You're no longer lying to yourself just to keep the other person. You begin to look at yourself with more compassion. You begin to embrace pain as part of your spiritual awakening process. You begin to understand that this suffering isn't the end. It's the crossing. It's the necessary break to break the cycle of silent emotional pain you've been carrying for so long. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." And now you realize that this wound, however exposed, is also sacred, because it's what brought you here. It's what tore apart the lie. It's what revealed the truth. It's what pushed you out of the illusion. And as much as it still hurts, You already know. You don't want to go back, because now you taste freedom. And it may be bitter at first, but it's the only one that truly nourishes. If you've experienced something like this, if you recognized the illusion and saw the truth arrive like a bolt of lightning that split everything in half, write in the comments, "I saw the truth." This sentence is a testimony, a mirror, a sign that your conscience is awake even if your heart is still in pieces. You are not the pain of truth. You are the soul that endured it. The truth arrived. Yes, it tore you apart, dismantled you, threw you into an inner place where there was no longer any control, where certainties evaporated, where even faith seemed to fall silent for a few moments. But you didn't break. You bent. You screamed silently, but you didn't disappear. You felt the weight of bare reality without poetry, without promises, but still, you stayed. And it is in this staying that something sacred began to happen, because only those who stay can make it through. Only those who feel until the end can be born on the other side. And now something in you has begun to change. You're not the same anymore. You still have pain. You still have confusion. You still have burning memories. But now you carry something that wasn't there before. Presence. A real, solid, silent presence. Consciousness has begun to occupy the spaces where before there was only fear, where before there was only a need for approval, for acceptance, for love from outside. You've begun to see yourself, not as the victim of the story, but as the author who finally decided to rewrite the plot. And this decision is the spiritual turning point. You're no longer content with what was offered to you in crumbs. You no longer believe in promises that don't hold up over time. You no longer desire what made you forget yourself. What you want now has no clear name. It's something more subtle, deeper, lighter. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's truth. Maybe it's a reunion with your own soul after years of disconnection from the world. The truth hurts, yes. It arrived like a fire, and you lost a lot. But at the same time, it was this fire that freed you, because it burned away what kept you small, because it destroyed the emotional prison you'd placed yourself in, because it illuminated parts of you that had been forgotten. You're beginning to understand that the pain wasn't the problem. Resistance to the pain was. And now that you can no longer resist it, it begins to lose its grip, because there's no longer any struggle. There's surrender. This surrender is not giving up. It is not weakness. It is not passivity. This surrender is a spiritual gesture. It is when the soul says, "I accept, I no longer run. I trust that this path, however dark it may seem, is leading me home." And that is what begins to happen. A slow, silent, but profound return. A return to what is true, to what is essential, to what is yours, to what was always yours, but which was buried by borrowed stories, by inherited beliefs, by pains you accepted to carry as your own. Rumi said, "Don't settle for other people's stories. Live your own legend." And maybe that's the phrase that resonates with you now, because living your own legend isn't about having everything under control, nor about appearing strong all the time. It's about being honest with how you feel. It's about recognizing when the path needs to change. It's about knowing that your worth doesn't depend on who chooses you, but on who you decide to be in the face of what tears you apart. And now you've decided, you will no longer diminish yourself. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer need to mold yourself to fit the eyes of those who never saw your essence. You no longer need to beg for presence, love, or recognition. Your soul knows your worth. And when this awareness begins to take root, the world around you begins to lose its power to hurt you, because you're no longer seeking outside what has already begun to blossom within. This is the turning point, and it doesn't happen with fireworks. It happens quietly, when you wake up and, for the first time in a long time, feel like you don't have to fight. When you look back with compassion, not guilt. When you understand that all the stumbles have led you exactly to this point, and that no matter how much it hurt, you endured. You stayed. You stood tall. And that's no small feat. Spiritual transformation doesn't make you perfect. It makes you real. You still have doubts, you still miss someone, you still cry sometimes, but now every tear has meaning. Now every silence is a place of listening. Now every goodbye is also a rebirth. Because you already understand. What remains after the truth is always purer than what came before it. You begin to honor your journey. You begin to forgive yourself. You begin to respect yourself. You begin to make different choices. You begin to say no firmly. You begin to say yes with all your heart. And with that, a new frequency begins to vibrate within you. A frequency of healing, of wholeness, of presence. And those who vibrate at this frequency begin to attract more authentic experiences. Not perfect, but true. Because now you only want what has soul. You no longer have to try so hard to be loved. Now, the love that matters is the one that arises from your own presence. And it is from this that everything begins to blossom. More conscious relationships, deeper bonds, more healing silences. You are reconnecting with your soul. And this connection changes everything. Because when your soul is present, you no longer negotiate your truth. You live it. If you feel that this spiritual shift is happening within you now, if you recognize this silent movement of returning to your own truth, write in the comments, "I crossed." This sentence is your milestone, your turning point, the record that something in you will never go back to the way it was before. After the pain comes silence, but not just any silence. Not that empty silence that so often signified absence, abandonment, indifference. Not that tense silence when you choked back tears just to avoid disturbing others, just to appear strong, just to survive another day. Not the silence that weighs heavily. The silence that comes after true pain is different. It's a living silence. It's the silence that heals. This silence doesn't shout, but reveals. It doesn't demand, but invites. It doesn't arrive as an answer. It arrives as a space. A sacred space where everything left after the emotional collapse begins to reorganize. Because after the pain, you are no longer the same. Something has been cleansed. Something has been ripped away. Something has been returned to the universe. And what remains is this feeling of beginning again, of presence, of encounter. At first, this silence can be frightening. You're used to noise, to incessant thoughts, to internal pressures, to mental dialogues with people who have already passed away. You're used to thinking about everything, to rationalizing the pain, controlling the narrative, interpreting the signs. But suddenly, all of this loses its power. The mind no longer has much to say. The heart stops screaming, and the body just breathes. It's in this space that you begin to hear something new, your essence, not the image you created to please, not the persona you developed to protect yourself, but the part of you that has always been there, quiet, firm, whole, waiting for the moment you were ready to listen. This part is your soul, and it speaks in silence. It doesn't impose itself. It doesn't argue. It simply vibrates. And when you feel this vibration, you understand what peace is. Not the superficial peace of a good day, not the temporary peace of a received affection, but the peace of someone who is whole, even if still in pieces. The peace of someone who has finally returned home. The peace of someone who no longer needs to prove themselves. Of someone who no longer seeks to be seen by eyes that have never truly seen. The peace of someone who has accepted that life has cycles. That pain is a teacher. That silence is a portal. This silence heals because it doesn't distract you. It finds you. It doesn't distance you from pain. It brings you closer to yourself. And in this encounter with your essence, you begin to remember who you are without the wounds. You begin to remember who you were before you learned to be silent to be loved, before you accepted crumbs, before you distanced yourself to belong at any cost. And this remembering is more than memory. It is spiritual reconnection. It is internal realignment. It is reconciliation. The pain was just the beginning. Peace comes after the crossing. And this crossing wasn't easy. You felt the ground disappear. You saw masks fall. You watched helpless as relationships, expectations, and beliefs crumbled. You cried, you fell silent, you broke down. But now, in this place where words don't reach, you find something precious, your uninterrupted truth. And with this truth comes lightness. Not that fleeting euphoria, but a stable serenity, one that doesn't depend on others, that doesn't change with the weather, that isn't shattered by someone's absence. This lightness comes from the simple fact of no longer needing to pretend, no longer needing to resist, no longer needing to explain yourself, because your presence now is enough. Your soul is no longer begging for attention. It is simply being, and being, at this stage, is the greatest spiritual act. Maybe you don't know how to express all this yet. Maybe you can't put it into words. And that's okay. The soul doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be felt. The silence that comes after pain is a field where you begin to move with more subtlety, with more awareness. Your choices change. Your outlook changes. Your reactions change. Because you're no longer trying to survive. You're beginning to live. And living now is something else. It's living from the center, not the surface. It's living by listening to your intuition, not your needs. It's living without getting lost in promises, without getting distracted by illusions, without abandoning yourself halfway. It's living with presence, with truth, with soul. This is the healing effect of silence. It brings you back to yourself. It brings you back to the present. You begin to realize that many of the things you so desired no longer make sense. That many of the bonds you fought to maintain were constructs of a self that no longer exists. That many of the goals that drove you were attempts to validate yourself. And now, with this new awareness, you can do things differently. You can walk slower. You can feel more deeply. You can love without sacrificing yourself. You can simply be without needing to be anything other than who you are. True spirituality begins in this silence, not in speeches, not in theories. It's in this space where you hear yourself for the first time without interference, where heart and soul speak the same language, where pain no longer needs to be repeated for healing to occur, because now there is listening, now there is truth, now there is presence. If you are in this space right now, if you feel this silence expanding within you not as absence but as fullness, write in the comments, "I listen to myself." This phrase is a reflection of your journey. It's a sign that something within you has awakened, and you're ready to live in peace with your own presence. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is ready to change. It doesn't matter if it was with tears in your eyes, silence in your chest, or a lump in your throat. If this truth hurt you, it's because it was real. Now subscribe to the channel and walk with me. This journey doesn't end here. It's just beginning. And if all this touched you, if it affected you, if it transformed you even a little, leave your like. Not out of obligation, but as a silent sign that your soul is present. We'll see you in the next chapter of this journey. And if something inside you wants to continue this dive, the next video is already waiting for you on the screen. Go ahead, click, and continue. Because whoever wakes up can never sleep the same way again.